Well, good morning, Alice. It's good to have you back with us again here on this beautiful April day. How are
Yeah,
you
good
doing?
morning. Good, good. It is beautiful. I'm here in Texas and it's wonderful weather down here.
Well, I'm in Oregon, as you know, and April is usually the month where it just rains nonstop. We call it April showers bring May flowers because it's a beautiful time of the year. We do need the rain in order for the flowers to start blooming. But for some reason, it's been a very mild spring. And so we really haven't had too much rain and lots of sunny days. It feels like summer already here, actually, which is a little bit scary. Um, but I'm not complaining because I love the sun. We need that vitamin D, especially after a long winter. But we're going to be using this theme today to talk about how April showers really do bring Mayflowers. The hard things in our life can bring some really beautiful things if we let them, if we take the opportunity to let those things shape into beautiful things. So we're going to be talking first. We're going to be talking about special immigrant juvenile status, also called SIGIS. Some people refer to it SIJS. I go back and forth between the two. I don't know how you call it. In Spanish, we call it the juvenile visa, la visa juvenil. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that today. And then we've got some other information we want to share about religious worker visas because this month usually is Easter as well. Sometimes it's in March. I never quite like why. What is that? Like, why can we never predict when Easter is going to be? But that's an aside. So let's just jump into it. I started actually doing special immigrant juvenile visas in Texas when I lived there, 2010 to 2016, and that's where I got my start as an immigration attorney. And so moving back to Oregon, I learned that each state does these differently. It starts by going into state court, and the state court has to recognize that a juvenile, and it depends state to state how old juvenile goes, right? In Texas, I believe it's still 18. They haven't changed that,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
still 18. But in Oregon, it goes up to 21, and there's many states that have made special laws allowing for the juvenile status to go up to the age of 21, which makes sense. I don't think they're doing anything wrong there or anything that anybody else really would complain about. Many of these immigrant children that come here, even if they're over, 16, 17, 18, even up to 20, 21, sometimes they're just like having such a hard, steep learning curve to get used to living here. Maybe they have support, maybe they don't. And so I think it really makes sense that they extend this age to 21 in many states. Do you think Texas will ever extend it to 21, or is it just never going to happen there?
Um, I, I think as long as we're as red as we are, I don't think it will extend up to 21. But yeah, I definitely think there's a valid legal argument to be made. I mean, you can't buy cigarettes or alcohol until you're 21. You can't rent a car or a hotel until you're in your 20s. So, I mean, there's valid arguments for why some states have the age of 21 and some have 18.
Yeah. Yeah, and so in Oregon, they actually call it a vulnerable youth. So between 18 and 21, it's considered a vulnerable youth. And like I said, there were special laws that were enacted to protect and support them. And I love that. I'm from Oregon, and I love that we're one of the states where we can help these youth over the age of 18 up to the age of 21. And so it does start in state court, like I was saying, and it depends what state you're in. The laws there are going to decide whether or not a person is going to be eligible. What we usually do here is called a guardianship. And so that's a legal process of giving like kind of parental rights, you could say, or responsibilities to someone who's not necessarily a parent, but is kind of standing in the place of a parent. Because as we know, many of these immigrant youth come without their parents, and or maybe with one parent. And so we want to make sure that these youth have some kind of support in their lives. A guardian is able to, for example, take someone to the doctor and get them medical care, take someone and enroll them in school, help someone decide where they're going to be living, provide for them financially and emotionally as well. And so a guardianship is not like, it's not exactly a parent, but it's like a parent. And it's something that can be used to really help these youth get established and find the support that they need. And I just want to take a pause here to recognize that you have some children in your home that did not come from your womb. Some that did,
Right.
some that did not, but regardless, they are considered family. And so I just want to acknowledge that you as well have taken many kids under your wing, and I think that's a beautiful thing. Do you want to share about that at all here?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an open book. I've shared my story in a lot of different forums, but yeah, my husband and I were foster parents, and we uh, just were really, really. It was just really impressed on us that there are so many kids out there that need homes, and we have a home, so why not put two and two together? And it worked out really well. The goal of fostering obviously is reunification with their birth family, and so while we were fostering, we were able to meet our kid's birth mom and talk with her and love on her through some really, really tough times. And at the end of the day, she actually asked us to adopt the three kiddos of hers that we were fostering. And so for us, it worked out in a way that we believe was in their best interests, and obviously grew our family. But yeah, that's just a really integral part of our story, and just my DNA in general, and my husband's as well. We talked about fostering and adopting before we even got married, and knew we were going to have bio children. Like, that was just always part of the plan. But there are vulnerable youths out there, whether they're from US citizen parents or non-citizen parents, whether they came here, with family or on their own, with a visa, without a visa. There's a lot of different situations, but it doesn't change the fact that you have a child who is in a vulnerable position that needs protection and advocacy, whether that's a guardian, whether that's foster care, whether that's special immigrant visa status or something else. So, fortunately, the immigration law does have certain options available to kiddos in this situation.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that you guys have done that. I wish one day, maybe one day I'll have an opportunity to do that as well. I think it's beautiful. Challenging but beautiful, I know. So thank you for what you're doing. And here in Oregon, the guardianship, as I was talking about, actually, one story I wanted to share was something that I did in Texas. One of my first cases that I helped, this young man was staying with a teacher of his because he was basically homeless. And the teacher reached out to me and said, I really want to help this case. He's, really needs the support, and I really see a future in him, and I'd like to give him, that the support that he needs to get there. And so he did want to adopt him as well. And I thought that was just a beautiful thing. We ended up, because the laws are kind of complicated, we had to do the adoption later once he got his green card. But he did end up adopting him, and I just thought that was such a beautiful ending to what could have been a really challenging start for this young man. And uh, and the sacrifices that this teacher made. I mean, teachers in general make sacrifices, but this was like going even further beyond. And as I was saying earlier, the hard things in life can get us to amazing places and beautiful things. In order to qualify for the special immigrant juvenile status, you need to show that either your mom or your dad or both of them either abused, abandoned, or neglected you. So this young man who got his green card and eventually was adopted by his teacher, like, he had to go through some really hard things in his life in order to get to that point. And whenever I meet with a young client, I always tell them how courageous they are, for the things that they've already done in their young life, all the things they've already survived, and how I do believe that the hard things in life are meant to be turned around for our good, to make us stronger. And in these cases, like, to possibly get a green card that way. I think it's beautiful. This area of the law, of immigration law, is really one of my favorites. because I love kids and I love immigration, and I think it's just a beautiful way for a kiddo to redeem some of the hard things in life. Do you have any stories that you want to share about any of the kiddos that you've worked with, either personally or professionally?
Well, I think one of the things, both personally and professionally, that I try to stress to my clients is, just because we're pursuing this doesn't mean that your parents are bad people, because we don't want to sever those important familial bonds, right? Now, this may be a legal proceeding that's leading to something. And yes, there are some consequences of that as far as whether they can petition for parents and stuff in the future. So there are definitely a lot of things you want to think through and consider. But we also want to stress to the clients, look, we're not saying your parents are bad people. We're not telling you you have to hate them or, whatever. What we're doing is we're saying the position that you're in right now meets a legal standard of abandonment, abuse, or neglect. Um, and that entitles you to certain levels of protections based on your age. And I look at it as a mom thing. I mean, I have a 23-year-old and an 18-year-old down to a 13-year-old, but I think about my 18-year-old who is a senior in high school and getting ready to go off to college. Like, I mean, it makes me nervous to think he's going off in the real world. Like, are you really ready to be an adult, a real life adult? Or do you still need your parents to help you? Do you still need the support, whether it's emotional support, financial support, just wisdom and guidance and things like that? And so making sure that we're honoring their parents through the process while also advocating for our child. It's a really fine line to walk. So those of us that really focus on this area of law and do this a lot, I think that's really crucial in finding good advocates.
Absolutely. Yeah. I find that challenging as well because I mean, we love our parents and good or bad, like we don't want to speak poorly of them. They gave us life and they raised us up and there's always good with the bad. And so and many of the kids they just say, well, yeah, I was a bad kid and so I would get spanked or I would get hit with a belt or I would, get I wouldn't get food for days or something. And so to them, that's normal. That's normal discipline where they come from. It's culturally acceptable. Here in the US, obviously, like that is not something that is acceptable. And so to provide some insight into what is acceptable parenting here in the US and what is not. And also at the same time, like allowing for there to be an acceptance of who their parents are and that their parents did the best that they could. All of us as parents, like I make mistakes, you make mistakes. None of us are perfect. Like we are doing the best that we can. And many parents who do use physical discipline, they were raised that way. And so it's just something that was, that feels normal to them. And so that's why they do it to their children as well. Abandonment too, like people are like, well, no, nobody abandoned me. Well, was your father or your mother in the picture? Like, did they live with you? Did they financially provide for you? And then neglect, like in many countries, they're just doing the best they can. But, many times children don't go to the doctor when they need to, or don't eat 3 meals a day like they should, or maybe just have tortillas and beans, every day, once a day. That can be, those are things that could be considered to qualify as neglect. Maybe they never went to the dentist and their teeth are, all rotten out. So I've seen a lot of different things that do qualify. I'm curious if you have any of those types of examples that people might not think of as abuse, abandonment, or neglect.
Well, I think you did a good job of explaining, the different levels. I rather than maybe give you an example and expand on what you've already said, I guess I would also just say, while there are cases like that are kind of things that we as lawyers identify, there also are very clear instances of abuse. And sometimes this SIJ pathway will allow for something where maybe something like asylum is kind of out of their reach, or it's not an option for them, or something that's not a realistic um, thing as far as being successful. And so, having a claim based on the abuse side of things, or the complete abandonment, or, the fact that, hey, you're 15 and I can't feed anybody else. Go to the United States, figure it out. And while that's in one way encouraging their child to live a better life, it is legally abandonment. And the kiddos don't know that. So, like you said, it's really talking with the kiddos and figuring out what their situation is, and finding out, what they qualify for. And we just want to do that in the most respectful way possible.
Yeah, that's a great point. At 14, 15, 16, many of these children, they are still children, they feel proud that they're coming to the US to help send money back home. And maybe their older
Right.
siblings did it before them, and they feel like they can contribute to the financial stability of their home. But that is not a child's job. That is not a child's place to need to leave school so young and travel to a foreign country where they don't speak the language, where, they're going to probably be exploited in the working, and they're not going to have work authorization. So there's just very many reasons why it's a bad idea, as a parent. But I could understand why a parent would feel, no other option. And so
Yeah.
again, no judgment there. What we're looking at here is how to use these things for the good of the child, and how can we protect, these vulnerable children and youth, and really support them, on their journey. And so, as I was saying, this is like one of my favorite areas of the law, but we have seen attacks under this administration, across all areas of immigration. But especially with the most vulnerable. And that's why I call this a bully administration, because it's the bullies who attack the most vulnerable and the weakest and the youngest. And so I wanted to talk about the process of getting status through special immigrant juvenile, visa, and the ways that it's changed, the compared to what it was under previous administrations, and how we hope it might, change back for the good in the future, if we see some positive change again. So one of the main benefits of getting, an approved I-360 special immigrant juvenile visa is that historically it has also given you deferred action. And deferred action essentially means we are not going to deport you. We are going to allow you to stay here. You will be able to get a work authorization. And eventually you will, through the SIJ process, you will be able to get your green card. Now, it is sometimes a lengthy wait, because there's only a certain number of these that can be approved each year. And so one of the changes that happened last year was that the Trump administration said, nope, we're not going to automatically give deferred action anymore. And as there should be, there was a lawsuit, and I believe that's still ongoing. And the result of that was that a judge actually said, no, you can't actually just do that. You can't just take that away. You need to give it, you need to start giving it. And so the government, in its usual fashion, has just said, no, we're not. So talk to me about that. What has that meant for many of our clients?
Well, and just so we're really clear, for people who are not immigration lawyers, and the process to getting to that point it's a long process. And you mentioned before going to state court. What that requires is a state court judge has to make a finding based on evidence, testimony, investigation, all in reports by caseworkers and everybody else. A state court judge has to make a determination that this child has been deemed abandoned, abused, or neglect under the law, and that it is not in that child's best interest to return to their country. And the whole point of these state courts is to look out for the child's best interest. And the court has determined that it is not in that child's best interest to go back to their country. Okay. And so then we're using that state court order to file the I-360 that you mentioned to get the special immigrant juvenile visa approved. But you also mentioned there's a really long wait for that. And so while between the time that it's approved and the time that a visa is available to actually get a green card, there's this waiting period. And so what deferred action has done is protected these kiddos that a judge has said should not go back to their country. Okay. And what this administration has done is essentially said, well, I don't care what the state court judge says after a finding of evidence. We're going to deport you anyways, even though you have a state court order protecting you, even though you have a guardianship in place, even though you have an I-360 approved, and we found that you are, we have agreed that you're, qualify for this benefit, we're still going to deport you. Like, I just think that most Americans really do not understand that. And so I guess I just wanted to take a minute and explain that, because I feel like I have to explain that a lot to people, but that is a huge change that negatively impacts these kiddos who are here, who are essentially protected under deferred action with work authorization. They're maybe going to school, they're contributing to their society, they're maybe working. But, for the most part, these are good kids that are kids, they're just trying to live their life and go to school and, do what they can. And the court has a guardianship in place as their parent in the United States. And that should be what makes the decisions. But what this administration has done is just unilaterally said, I don't care. We're going to do what we want anyway. So it's really impactful. It leaves these kiddos in, a constant state of anxiety. We're seeing trauma and mental health issues in kiddos go up and their families. Not just the kids that are affected, but the US citizen kids who are friends with these kids are I mean, this is just infecting every aspect of these kiddos. And sorry, I didn't mean to get on a soapbox there, but it permeates American society in so many negative ways when you, as a bully, target these vulnerable populations. And that's exactly what this has done. It's not deporting the worst of the worst. You're literally deporting kids, with state court judge protection. So make it make sense.
Exactly. Thank you for breaking it down so well. I love how you explain things. And that's exactly the problem. Like, why are we negating what, one court, just because you don't like a process, you don't like what the law says, instead of changing the law, you just make it impossible for these kiddos to actually get the benefit that they are supposed to get through the law. We see it also in immigration court, because many of these kids that come here, they do get caught at the border. And so then they're put into a process of removal. They have to go to court. The judge has to decide whether they're going to stay here or not. And so usually in the past, most judges would keep a case open until that I-360 was approved. And then they say, okay, like, you have deferred action. We can't deport you anyways. We're going to close your case. So now that deferred action has been taken away, the judges are like, they're all trying to decide what to do with these cases. Should we still close them? And of course, the government's instructed to keep them open and deport these kids. It's just a mess. It's complete inefficiency in the courts, and very stressful for the kids. We have some judges who just decide that they don't care what the law says. They're going to take away any status or any protections from the kids, and that's wrong. I think anybody with a basic understanding of human decency would agree that this is wrong. But I digress. We've gotten onto a very negative path. Let's go back to talking about all the positive things that can happen from this special immigrant juvenile status. You mentioned earlier about asylum, and one of the ways I like to explain the two options to these kiddos is that with asylum, they might be eligible for both, and we might pursue both of them. But if they ultimately win asylum, they're not going to be able to go back home ever, potentially. And so with the special immigrant juvenile status, they can eventually go back home. And as you were saying, like, we're not trying to cut these kiddos off from their parents. We're trying to give them the support that they need to be successful, to contribute here in the US, and to be healthy citizens. And so that does not require that we cut them off from their mom or their dad or their extended family. And I want to encourage that. So most of our clients will eventually get their status through SIJ instead of asylum. And that's one thing I wanted to highlight, is that's a benefit of that process. One of the negative things, as you mentioned before, is that it does also cut off their ability to apply for their parents. So even though some of these kids will become US citizens, they will never be able to apply for their parents, even the ones that didn't harm them. That's the way that the law is written. It just cuts off both those parents. So it's not, a perfect process, but it's one of my favorite processes under immigration law. And so before we move on to talking about another topic, is there any cute stories or anything you want to share about the special immigrant juvenile process?
No, it's just to say, just to highlight what you mentioned, which is that these kids have options. And, our role as their advocate, as their attorney, is to help them explore not only one, what are you eligible for? But number two, what ultimately is going to help you reach your goals? And what's right for one child may not be right for another. And we have to listen to their voice as well. And, it's really important. Some of our kiddos are extra vulnerable and they have extra situations involved, and maybe there are advocates, and so it's really important that we really have a holistic approach to working with all of the professionals in these kiddos' lives, to listen to their voice and their concerns and figure out what is the best path, not just for you today, but for you long term. What is going to give you safety and security for yourself and for your goals in the future. And just doing that is really an honor and a privilege to get to be a part of, because like you, I've been doing this a long time, and we're able at this point in our career to see down the road the positive benefits that these kiddos have after going through this long and arduous process, being approved, becoming residents, becoming citizens, becoming parents themselves, and having, healing from, trauma and things that they have gone through. So, it really is a beautiful thing. I think about our theme, our butterfly, right, is the metamorphosis through all these different stages of life that our kiddos go through. And what an honor it is to be able to sit back and watch these super courageous kids go through such a hard adult thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it provides them with this sense of like a self-empowerment or autonomy, where they can make those decisions, things that maybe they haven't in the past been able to. And they are really important adult decisions that they're having to make. But I feel very privileged, like you said, that we get to help them along the way. So
Yeah.
so many kids that we've helped, and it's really a beautiful thing. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and pivot and talk about another area of immigration law that I love working in. Both you and I come from long history of growing up in the church and working with pastors, and so the religious worker visa. This is actually one that's kind of thriving right now, and under this administration, we're finally seeing some movement with many of our cases that were taking a long time. There's been some updates that I want to hear from you about. So tell me, how did you get into doing religious worker visas?
Well, I love religious worker visas. It's one of my favorite parts of doing immigration law. It's the direct advocacy. I actually started out just because I wanted to serve my church and I wanted to offer this service, and I was the only immigration attorney, and learned this area of law. I had a good mentor, and really enjoyed it. Enjoyed this side of advocating for not just the proposed immigrant, but also for the church, and, growing the church big C, right? Not just the church locally, but the the big church. And it's not just Christian churches. I've represented mosques, I've represented Jewish schools, I've represented a Hindu temple. So, I mean, representing multiple religions is really, really a blessing for me as an immigration attorney, but just getting into it by wanting to serve my church.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's break it down. What are the options? What are the different positions that are available? What are some of the cases that you've worked on?
Okay, well, so there's a couple of options. It really starts with an R non-immigrant visa is really where most people start, and that a religious worker visa is an R visa. And it is for pastors or religious workers. Not, you don't even have to be a pastor, but it has to be a religious work or religious vocation that you are pursuing. You have to work with an organization in the United States that's the same denomination as you for at least 2 years, which means you have to have fundamentally the same beliefs for at least 2 years before you can actually try to get a visa through this. The organization has to be a recognized nonprofit here in the United States and has to be willing to support you as a religious worker through salary or other ways of income. But you have to at least be part-time. You've got to work in that religious work. It can't just be administrative duties for a church. You actually have to do religious work as part of your job. But the most common thing that we see are international students that are here studying, their master's or getting their MDiv or something and seminary. And then they go off on OPT and they work for a church, and then that church wants to hire them. And then the church hires us, and we help file this petition to change their status from a student visa to a religious visa. And then they do that for a few years and then hopefully become eligible to file a petition for an immigrant visa where they can eventually get a green card. And that's, I think, some of the changes you were alluding to a moment ago.
Yeah, so are there any limitations on how long somebody can be in that status with the R visa? Can they bring family? Like, what are some of the options?
Yeah, so a religious worker can have a spouse and children with them on their status. The religious worker is an R1, the spouse and kids can be here as well. The spouse and kids aren't allowed to work in the United States, but they can be here in valid status with the principal applicant. And you can be in R status for a maximum of 5 years inside the United States. And so traditionally, the rule was it's approved. Your first one is approved for about 2.5 years, and then you file to extend it and renew it. You get that extended for 2.5 years, and then you meet that 5-year cap. Okay, and then at that point, generally they would just transition straight to green card because we would have filed the I-360 and a visa was available. But then a few years ago, there was a change, and then visas weren't available. And we found pastors in a really tough position. And a lot of them still are in this position where they max out that cap of 5 years. And then they're faced with a situation where they don't know what to do because you can't extend the R visa past that 5-year mark. And a visa is not available, so they can't get a green card. So we have pastors that are essentially forced to leave the United States. This is something brand new in the past few years. From my entire decades of practice doing this, that was very new several years ago, that just fundamentally negatively impacted our pastors. But the one good thing that the Trump administration has done that is that they have the rule was when you reach that 5-year cap and then a pastor would have to leave the United States, they would have to wait outside of the United States at least a year before they could file to come back in a new period of our visa status. And this administration has taken away that 1-year requirement outside the United States. So, that is a good thing for our pastors who meet that 5-year cap because a lot of their congregations were being negatively impacted because their pastor, their shepherd, had to leave the country for at least a year. And so you had these congregations that were just kind of floundering because they were rudderless. And so luckily there was some advocacy, and this was a gap that they were willing to close in this minimal way for this one group. But now our pastors who do have to leave can immediately reapply to re-enter and come back in another 5-year period, hopefully until they get their green card.
Yeah. I never understood why we had the cap, but many visas do have limitations on time, and so I'm curious like what thought went into it, but I definitely love that they've taken that away, especially given things need to adapt, and because there's limitations about how many green cards they can approve, both for special immigrant juvenile for lots of different categories, but we're talking right now about religious workers. I think that the laws also need to adapt and change, or at least the policies need to adapt and change to also support, because if it wasn't an issue before and now it's an issue, that we need to address that. It's not the fault of these individuals. It's just the system that's breaking down over time. So I think it definitely is good and helpful. And I want to point out too how much you said how disruptive some of these these rules and processes can be, not just to the family, not just to the immigrant, but like you said, to the whole church body. We've represented teachers in schools where they've had a
Yes.
hard time um, you know, getting teachers for private schools, people from a religious background that can also help with the religious part of the component of the education. It's very disruptive to those students. So just all around, so it's very just logical to do away with that 1 year abroad requirement. And to support this. So talk to us a little bit more about, how many steps to the process to getting a green card through the religious worker, any things that people should be watching for, be on the lookout, and careful about.
Yeah, so when someone approaches us and they're exploring the religious worker option, really the one of the most important things that we really have to hash out is if they are changing their status while they're in the United States, or if they're abroad and we're bringing them to the United States and they're entering on a religious visa. And that sounds like it doesn't matter, but it's actually a pretty big fundamental difference, because someone who changes, for example, from a student visa to a religious worker visa while they're in the United States, um, can't just leave the United States and then try to come back on that religious visa without going through another process at a consulate abroad. And so I always have to explain that to my clients, because there is a big difference between changing status in the United States and then entering the United States or being admitted on a religious worker visa. And a lot of our pastors do international missions work or international conferences. And so the ability to travel is really, really important. So we really have to explore that with our clients. So that's just a number one big, big pitfall that I always look out for and have to thoroughly go over with my clients, a lot of times, several times, because it can be very, very confusing. But there's multiple steps through the process. Um, Traditionally, there was the initial period of R1 for 2.5 years. There was the extension period of R1 for 2.5 years, which gave you that 5 years. During that second 2.5 year period of time, we were also simultaneously filing the I-360 petition. And so you mentioned the I-360 petition for the special immigrant juvenile work, special immigrant juvenile status for the kids. It's actually the same form that we're filing for our religious workers. That special immigrant petition includes multiple options, but it just so happens it includes the SIJs and the religious workers that we were talking about today. But then we file that petition, and that's an immigrant petition. It's the same as like filing for a spouse. When you, as a US citizen, file for a spouse, you're filing an immigrant petition. That's the same thing we're doing here. Is the church is filing an immigrant petition, or maybe the pastor is filing the immigrant petition on behalf of themselves. Those are other things that we look at, is whether the church is filing or the individual is filing. And there's a lot of factors that go into what why we choose the path that we choose. I think it can be a little complicated. So, this is definitely an area of immigration law that I would recommend churches and beneficiaries work with immigration lawyers on. You definitely don't want to pay all that money and do it the wrong way, right? It's one of those instances where it's cheaper to hire an attorney on the front end than to have to hire one later to try to fix an issue. But yeah,
Yeah,
and then
especially, sorry if I can interject there, especially on these ones, because if they mess up and the immigrant gets unlawful status here, or
yeah,
accrues unlawful presence, then they could be ineligible permanently. So yeah,
yeah.
definitely need to be really careful with this one and get legal advice at the onset as early as possible.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then once they get that I-360 petition approved, similar to the SIJs, you have to wait for a visa to be available. Up until a few years ago, visas were immediately available for our religious workers. And then there was a policy shift overnight, it seemed, without really any warning to us. And all of a sudden, just no immigrant visa petitions were processing for our religious workers anymore. And they were just paused indefinitely, which is what led to a lot of our religious workers meeting that 5-year cap and having to leave the United States. But we are seeing some movement on those again. We are actually in the process. I know you and I are working with the client you've had for a very long time, and we're finally able to get their green card application submitted, hopefully this month. And so making that progress can be slow, but it does look like we are finally making some progress, which is very hopeful.
Yeah, absolutely. And just going back and hitting again on what you already mentioned, this is not just for evangelical Christians. This is not just
Correct.
for Catholics. Like the US was founded on religious freedom, and that means freedom for all religions. And so I think it's beautiful that because we are a nation of immigrants, that the laws also recognize that we're all from different religious backgrounds and we need that support. And so we've done them. I know I have for Buddhist monks, for priests, for a Catholic school. I think they've even done one. They're even like some new age, very interesting things qualify. If you can show, like you said, if it's a nonprofit and it's related to something religious, and that person, shows a connection to it, then you can qualify. It's very not easy, but definitely easier than some of the other visa categories, I would say, in my opinion.
I think it's really a matter of good evidence, right? It's working with the church or the organization, the nonprofit, to get the right evidence that the government is looking for. And I think that's where, you and I, who have done many of these for many years, we kind of know what they're looking for, and have some help to help their organizations, with their letters, their offers, their schedules, things like that the government wants to see. But getting all of that information is really crucial, and showing the religious connection. One of my favorite cases, or one more unique cases, I guess, was I was a little wary. There was a nonprofit here in my area, very well known, great organization, did amazing work, and they were wanting to hire some kids, some students, in their graphic design department. And it's a religious organization. And all of their branding is religious organizations, very clearly a religious organization. But I was a little hesitant on whether or not the graphic design was going to be approved. We had to do some really fun lawyering there, to show that everything that this organization put out was religious based. Every aspect of their branding, every aspect of their messaging through the graphic design department had to be from someone who was in sync with their religious values. And so, doing that lawyering there, we were able to get approvals through for them, and those kids were able to stay and do a great job working for that company. And so there, there are a lot of things to consider. You don't have to be ordained. Um, One of the things that I explain to all of my organizations from the very beginning is that the word denomination is a legal term, because some churches have really strong feelings on what the word denomination means, right? And I want to explain, well, as you're a lawyer, my job is to advocate within the law, and we're using that word in a legal way, which may be a little more broad than what they're used to, which may mean that more people qualify. And so these are the things that a lawyer that does this kind of work is going to be looking at and advocating for, and talking to the organizations and the beneficiaries, and finding out if this is a viable option for them.
Yeah, I love that example of the graphic arts, because I think that just highlights it's not just pastors, ministers, it's
Right.
religious workers, and
Yes.
that can encompass a lot of different things. Creatively, I'm a musician as well, and so one of my favorite ones was for a music pastor and his family. And the church that they went to had struggled for a long time trying to find a worship pastor, and so it was a really beautiful fit to have that pastor come and serve in that capacity. And so, yeah, I think we think when we hear religious worker visa, we think of the priest, the pastor, the minister, whatever. It's not. It's
Right.
very much broader. Yeah.
It is. It is. You're right. You're right.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to end there for today. Thank you for joining me on this beautiful spring day. As we've been saying, April showers bring May flowers. My hope for everyone is that as you listen to this, you'll share this information with someone who might need it, pass it on, tuck it away in your head for a rainy day when you meet someone who might need this information. And we appreciate you staying all the way till the end to listen to every little morsel that we have to offer to you. And we appreciate you joining us again next month for more topics on immigration. Thanks for joining me, Alice.
Absolutely. Anytime. Thanks, Abby.